Well, hello everybody, this is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope you are having a great Friday. Welcome to Friday, the weekend's here. Woo! Today we are going to be talking about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's His Last Bow, and this will be stories 5 and 6. The first story we're going to cover is The Adventure of the Bruce-Partington Plans, which was wrote in 1908, which will be followed by The Adventure of the Dying Detective, which was wrote in 1913. Now, as far as this story goes, the first one we're going to do, of course, is The Adventure of the Bruce-Partington Plans. I got it. There we go. Awesome. This one, we'll just skip all the pleasantries and intro, but Minecraft basically busts up, gets Sherlock and Watson going on an adventure. And this has to do, again, with some of the state stuff that Minecraft does. Apparently there are some submarine plans that have come up missing. They're vital pages that have come up missing. These pages, there's 10 of them altogether. 3 of them are still missing. 7 of them were found on the body of Arthur West's body. Quite apparently, this gentleman fallen off of a train. Quite literally. Unfortunately, because of all the fog and everything, whenever they go to investigate it, they do find a witness, and the witness says that they heard a thud, but they couldn't really tell what had happened, where it had come from, or why even, because of all the fog. Where West's body was found was in a Underground Railroad location. And there was an important thing about West. He worked at a place which had to do a little bit with the government, the Royal Arsenal. His head was crushed, which is kind of grotesque in a way. The thing that really clued people in about what might be going on, or that this wasn't what it seemed to be, is that the guy had just a little bit of money on him, a couple of theater tickets, but he didn't have an Underground Railroad ticket. The main problem with all this is that those 3 pages that happened to be missing were the most important ones, and with those you could actually build the submarine. And there's a lot of postulation at this point, and the problem is quite complex. He did fall off of a train, and that he did steal the plans, but why would those 3 pages be missing if he had stole them and he meant to sell them? And of course, whenever Holmes starts to investigate the scene where the body was found, he determines that, oh, this guy, he wasn't murdered on the train, he was murdered somewhere else, but he was on the train and fell off. It probably has something to do with the switch, or the switchback that they had gone over, and that had jarred the body loose, and then he fell off of the train, and that's what the person that had reported hearing the thud had actually heard. So, in true Holmes fashion, he decides he's going to visit with the person that was actually responsible for the papers, but unfortunately, that gentleman had died. Or at least that's what his brother, Colonel Valentine Walter, had to say about it whenever Sherlock was there. With that being said, West's fiancée was actually a whole lot more informative than his brother was. She noticed that West had had a lot of things on his mind over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, and he was afraid that the secret of, where things were could be seen, plans could be devised on how to get those, because even though those iron bars were on the building, it could be seen through quite easily. And West had also made comments about if they did get a hold of that secret, how much they would be able to make from it. On the night that they were going to go to the theater, he dashed off, never to be seen again. It's looking bad for Mr. West, isn't it? So then Holmes follows the trail even farther. He goes to the building where the plans would be saved at, and he talks to a Sidney Johnson, which was, by coincidence, the senior clerk. And Sidney Johnson tells him that if somebody were to actually steal the plans, every night I put them in the safe, and whoever steals these plans or has stolen these plans would need to have 3 keys, one to the building, one to the office, and one to the safe. But on West's body, there wasn't any keys found. As far as anybody knows, the late Sir James was the only one that actually had the keys. And while they're talking with Sherlock, Sidney Johnson does mention that one of those particular pages that was stolen would be very valuable to a trader of the state, which, if I remember correctly, that information comes into play later on in the story. Now, with the information that he has gathered from all these witnesses, Mycroft, and just everything in general, and with Sherlock's mind, he ends up pinpointing somebody that would be a person of interest. A one Hugo Oberstein, who had left very coincidentally close to when West had disappeared. After going to the guy's house, Holmes finds out quite easily that his house backs up to the railroad station. Just happenstance is that track that his house backs up to is actually the above ground portion of the underground train. There's several occasions that the train will actually stop right below his windows. Now, upon inspection of the windowsills and this, that, and the other, they do find some smudges on the soot and some blood stains around the windowsill. And now it seems quite obvious that the body was laid on the train instead of dropped on it, or somebody climbing the train and actually putting the body on the top. Now, after Watson and Sherlock break into this guy's house and they do that investigation, they also find some telegraphs that are laying around that have to do with business type deals. And they're all signed by one particular individual. And the messages that are in these telegraphs are quite cryptic. So Sherlock does his thing and does a quite cryptic message and puts it in the Times, I believe. Just waits. Surprisingly enough, the person that shows up is Colonel Valentine Walter himself. It is, of course, at this point where Walter completely confesses his sins and says, yes, I did steal them, but I didn't kill the guy. That was Oberstein. He works with Sherlock and our favorite detective, the Peacock himself. That's right, Lestrade, and tells them that it was Oberstein that had beat in West Head. And the reason why there was just 3 that was missing was because it was too much information to write down in one setting. And to get all this information back, he works with Lestrade, Mycroft, and Sherlock and Watson to get Oberstein to come back. And whenever he does, of course, Oberstein is arrested. Now, unfortunately, Colonel Valentine does go to jail, and rightfully so, because of treason. But while he's there, he's not there for a long time at all before he dies. In West, what was his involvement in this? Essentially, he had seen the thievery happening, and whenever he saw this, he started chasing after, guess who? That's right. And his payment for his service to his country was that he had his head beat in. And then the documents that were already copied were put on his possession to mislead the authorities on who might have stolen it. And Walter's motivations was just simple. He was deep in debt and needed a way out, and he knew that if he was able to sell the plans to the submarine, he would make a lot of money, freeing him from his bondage. But unfortunately, he put himself into more servitude. Now, it does need to be said that there's a lot of hints towards the end of this little short story about who it is that puts the pin on Sherlock for what he did in saving the plans and keeping it out of the hands of enemies of the state, etc. He was awarded a very special pin. It was an emerald tie pin. It's kind of obvious who it was. It would have been the Queen. And if we look at the year of the publication of the book, which was 1895, right? Or the short story, excuse me. That was whenever she was actually still empowered. And that wraps up this one. Yay! Now on to the next. And now for the next one. The Adventure of the Dying Detective. This one was kind of short, but I really dug it quite a bit compared to some of the other short stories. Even though this one was a short story in every sense of the word, there was a reason why I enjoyed this one a lot. It's not every day that Sherlock dotes on Watson. He gives him some high praise towards the end of the story. So I enjoyed that. I found that refreshing, and I liked that quite a bit. So, pretty well on the opening of this story, Watson goes to visit with Sherlock. Well, Sherlock's not doing so good. He's laying in his bed, he's ill, he's mad. His landlord, she's very concerned about him. There's just this whole scene of he's emaciated, he's ill, his voice is very raspy, he's not doing very well, and he needs to have Watson run some errands for him. And in their conversation, Sherlock and Watson are discussing this illness, and it apparently is a rare tropical disease, Tepinoli fever, and Sherlock had contracted this while apparently he was on a case. They discuss this a little bit on, is this a thing that's catching? Because there was this other person, this Smith's nephew, he contracted the exact same thing, and is this something that's in the air? Is this something that's going to be spreading? But Sherlock kind of puts it on Watson to just kind of chill out. I need you to go do some stuff, but hang out with me for 6 hours. And by the way, don't touch my stuff. Watson starts examining some of the things that are around the room, and Sherlock does get very angered. Almost to the point of a delirium type of an anger. And we have already found out that he hasn't ate or drank anything in like 3 days total. Things are just looking really dire. Of course, Watson being the caring individual that he is and being a medical professional on top of it, he really wants to help his friend out. And every time he tries to approach Sherlock pushes him away. He's like, no, don't. This is highly contagious. And he starts ranting and raving. The thing is really a emotional, although it wasn't like wrote in a very super emotional way, but it is a very emotional scene where Watson just wants to help. And he's worried about his friend, but his friend seems to be stark raving mad, has an illness that probably won't be cured and is probably going to kill him, and he only wants to comfort him. He even expresses as much. So what if I catch it too, let me help you. But in true Sherlockian way, he works at Watson and convinces him to wait just a few hours before you go seeking help for this. Before you do anything drastic, just chill out with me. Come around about 6 o'clock in the evening, he instructs Watson to turn on one of the lamps, but only halfway. And then he asks him to bring Mr. Smith to his room. But it is very important that Watson arrives before Mr. Smith. So Watson, being the good fellow that he is, he takes off to go to Mr. Smith's house. And whenever he gets there, Mr. Smith is apparently not quite seeing anybody. He's being a pompous little person, quite really. But after Watson explains, look, this is for Sherlock, then somehow Mr. Smith's attitude drastically changes to the, oh yeah, sure, we'll go, and even agrees to be there within a half hour. Watson, knowing that he needed to be there first, excuses himself, saying that he has another appointment that he must make, and dashes off back to Sherlock's side. Now, whenever Watson gets back, Sherlock really puts it to Watson. He tells Watson, get at the headboard, get between the wall. There should be enough room there. And no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't come out whatsoever. Don't do it. Be quiet until I call for you. Which was kind of a weird thing, right? I kind of saw where this was headed. I kind of figured that there was a thing that Sherlock wanted a witness to something. At the same time, I really thought that it was to get Smith to admit that he had infected Sherlock, not where it headed at all. I had it kind of, but not really. Now, whenever Smith finally gets there, he starts going on and on about how intelligent he is and how wise he is and how good he is at what he does and blah, blah, blah. Because he really thought that Sherlock had been infected with the same thing that his nephew had been infected with. And in fact, Smith had sent this small ivory box, which was one of the things that Watson was getting ready to pick up and mess with. But that small ivory box had the infection, that illness, the tropical infection, that would have killed Sherlock. Now, what actually happens is Smith ends up admitting to killing his nephew and attempting to kill Sherlock. And the only reason why he really admitted to any of that was because he thought that Sherlock and him were alone and that these were Sherlock's last moments. And he was like, look, I want to gloat a little bit. Look at what I've done. I'm so awesome. I took out the best and biggest thing there ever was. Well, after the Nana and a boo-boo moment, Sherlock asks Smith to turn up the lantern to full, and whenever Smith asked Sherlock if there's anything else that he would require before he died, Sherlock's voice had changed, his manner had changed. He had gone from being very pale and ill and sickly to himself. He was still very thin and very gaunt because, he hadn't ate or drank anything, and he was probably not doing that well because 3 days, no food, no water. What Sherlock responds with is, yes, a match and a cigarette. And it was about that time whenever the inspector walks in. Unfortunately, it wasn't Lestrade. He is my favorite, even though he is a peacock, big plume peacock, a very proud peacock, that man. It was Inspector Morton. And Sherlock, of course, tells Inspector Morton, you need to arrest this guy because, one, he killed his nephew and he just tried to kill me. And Smith points out, well, it's just between me and you. It's my word against yours whenever it comes to a jury. But it is at that point where Sherlock asks Watson to step out from behind the screen headboard. Point is he was hidden, so that he can present himself as a witness to what was just said and that he can back Sherlock up. Now, it is at this point where Holmes describes this illness and everything was fake. This was the part that I liked the most about it because, it was a clever story to begin with the ruses and this, that, and the other. The reason why I liked it so much is because Sherlock, quite frankly, tells Watson, look, how much of an insult would it be to you for me to let you get close to me whenever I've got this makeup and all this kind of stuff on? That's the reason why I only had you turn the light on halfway, because I knew that if you came over here and started poking and prodding on me, as good as a medical person as you are, you would have figured out there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. It was my faith in your medical abilities is why I kept you at bay, because I knew that you would know better. And that is some of the highest praise, I believe, that Sherlock has ever given anybody, including the Pinkerton agent and the other officer that was there at one of the stories where he had doted on him for being the savior of such and such and such and such, right? This was high praise from Sherlock. Big thumbs up right there. Now, I'm curious to know, have you guys read this story before? If you had, I would love to know what you guys think about it down there in the comments section below. Let me know. And I am surprisingly good at responding to things that happen to show up down there. Again, this has been part 2 of Sherlock Holmes, His Last Bow, which was stories 5 and 6, The Adventure of the Bruce-Partington Plans, The Adventure of the Dying Detective. Like, share, subscribe. This has been Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I will see you on Monday.